architecture of our relationship between the EU and the US when we come to address important issues of this sort, that architecture needs to be examined, and we need to find new ways of making significant progress. And I think, even though it's now, I think, not particularly fashionable to say so, under the second Bush administration, there was an effort to do that with the construction of the Transatlantic Economic Council. Secretaries from the US administration meeting twice a year with senior commissioners. But I'm very disappointed that the consequence of the change of administration was that all of the dynamic in terms of the Transatlantic Economic Council got passed into the G20 process. So in other words, there was no specific, at that time, impetus within the United States that focused upon the US relationship with the EU. These things were looked at rather more in a global context. I don't think that it was at that stage a sort of, a geopolitical decision that was made by the US administration. I think, frankly, it was a personnel issue. There were an inadequate number of people who were working in the Treasury or even in the White House at that time who were sufficiently focused on these matters. It is the case that subsequently the tech process has been revived. Michael Frommer now in the White House has the responsibility taking that matter forward with one of the senior commissioners. That's true. But I don't believe that it has ever got back to the level of dynamism that it had maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that that is a major problem, especially sitting, as no doubt Mark and I were listening to President Obama yesterday, saying about the relationship between the EU and the United States is one that marks out the territory, as it were, in terms of the world economy, that we've made this world economy together, that the relationship between Britain and the United States is closer than it has ever been. I think a statement that is worthy of debate in itself. But put that aside, the reality is that I look at the approach of the administration and I do see a more global interest than an interest in building on this specific EU-US dimension, which troubles me a lot. I mean, I know that immediately following the appointment of Hillary Clinton, there was significant disappointment that Hillary Clinton's first visit was to the Far East rather than to Europe in itself. And then thereafter, there were visits to Europe by the President and by Hillary Clinton in order to reassure us that this relationship was still a warm relationship. I've got to say, I interpret the Obama visit over the course of the last few days in much the same vein. I struggle to find anything that is being said by the administration at this time, which leads me to the conclusion that these important issues, the detail of which have been touched upon by the panelists, that there is a focus in the US mind about trying to move forward on these issues. And I think that that is a real problem. I want finally to say, at the very end, to close my remarks, I think it's always best if you say something very nice about your hosts. So the Centre for European Studies, if you haven't already got it, this wonderful book here, The Future of World Trade. Good thing to hold up with Leon Britton, the former Trade Commissioner, alongside me, I think. But the only reason I picked it up is because of the photograph that we've got there. And if you look at it, it's a photograph of a container port. Well, the United States, of course, have passed legislation which says that soon every one of those containers must be 100% X-ray scanned before they will be allowed to be imported into the United States of America. I've got to say to you, was that a security measure or is that a protectionist measure? So for all of what I hear about the determination of the United States to work in conjunction with the EU, we have to recognize that we are operating against a background in which, for some people at least, particularly, I'm afraid, within the legislative process, the retention of regulatory divergence is viewed by them as something that's in their interests, even though ultimately I think it is against all of our interests.